Well, we've just officially hit the 3 o'clock hour here. I'm still going to give folks a minute or two to hop on the call. I see lots of people trickling in. I was saying that the trend of online meetings is people show up exactly on time. So we'll let those folks join. While we wait on additional folks here to join, I will also just share a couple things, and then I'll turn it over to our presenters for this afternoon. But welcome, we're excited to have you. As I said, we kicked off our Best of Showcase just earlier today, so we're still day one of our 2 weeks of programming. And so if you haven't had a chance to look at our other opportunities, there's lots of things coming up in the next 2 weeks, lots of topics covered. And most, except for the one that is noted, will be recorded and available after the fact. So even if you're not able to attend live, the recordings will be available for folks. So in the chat there, I've just put where you can find the full schedule and information on all those upcoming opportunities. And then, of course, I want to share some other opportunities with the CUHO. We're entering the fall, and there's lots happening between now and the end of the year. So our academic initiatives conference, our business operations conference, and our housing facility conferences are all running concurrently this year here in Columbus in early October. And we just extended the regular registration date for regular registration rate for a few more days. So that's coming up soon. And then we have some virtual options coming up later in the fall. Stars College for undergrads that may be interested in student affairs and housing careers. And then our Multicultural Institute and our Live-In Symposium. Both of those opportunities offer team passes. So if you're looking for something for your entire staff to do, there's some good rates there for groups to attend those virtual opportunities. And then the last thing I want to mention is that as I said, we're winding down 2023. And so as we look ahead to 2024, we have some volunteer positions that are coming open. So if you're someone that is interested in joining one of our committees or networks, we're specifically looking for folks that are interested in our chair track positions, but we also have information posted about just how to join some of those networks and committees and get involved at any level. And so I will put that link in the chat as well. And then with that, I will turn it over to our presenters. Today, we're joined by two folks from Texas A&M University. So Maggie Guzman and Carly Smith, and they are representing SWACUHO as the 2023 SWACUHO Best of Program winners. So I'll turn it over to them.
Well, howdy, everybody. Thank you for being here this afternoon. My name is Maggie Guzman. I'm an associate director at Texas A&M University, and I have responsibility for, risk management, our academic support and wellness initiatives, our training and development, and then human resources. And I will let Carly introduce herself as well.
Howdy, y'all. My name is Carly Smith, and I'm the Training and Development Manager here at Texas A&M. And so Maggie is my boss lady, and happy to do this presentation alongside her.
Yeah, so wanted to start with just a couple of caveats. One, our intended audience for this program when we presented it at our annual conference really is new professionals. So hopefully, if you are here as a new professional, you will get a lot out of this. But obviously, if you are not a new professional, difficult conversations are things we all have to do. So hopefully you more seasoned folks will also get something out of it as well. We also did this as a pretty interactive program when we presented it in person. We really relied on a lot of audience participation. So there will be a couple of times when we ask you guys to maybe drop your thoughts in the chat, or you can also just speak up if you want to unmute yourself and answer. But with that, we will kind of get into it. So before I advance to the next slide, we kind of wanted to talk a little bit about why we decided to present about this. In our roles here at Texas A&M, we interact a lot with a lot of our new professionals, a lot of our live-in staff and other new professionals who often come to us, mostly Carly, whenever they need some help with navigating some difficult conversations. We also sort of realize that a lot of the problems that our staff bring to us are often because they don't know how to navigate these difficult conversations, or they're not comfortable initiating difficult conversations, or they have been on the receiving end of a difficult conversation and don't really know how to process that or what to do with it. So we really felt like this was a timely topic that a lot of our folks here could use. And so we thought maybe the region would want to hear it too. So that's kind of what led us to talk about this. We are not experts by any means. Most of my career here at A&M has been spent doing risk management, and I tell people that in that, my job is to tell them they can't do things they want to do, or that they have to do things they don't want to do, which often leads to difficult conversations. So it's something that I've kind of gotten more comfortable doing throughout my time. And Carly, if you want to add anything about your experience with this, go for it.
Yeah, I think just based on position, leading a lot of trainings, meeting people when they first get to our campus. And so I also don't have any direct reports, which is kind of an interesting spot to be in. So I'm kind of like the safe little person over here that they can come to when they're having struggles with their supervisor or their supervisees and trying to navigate how to address some of those concerns. And so we have identified that there's a bit of a need in clarifying some different things around the art of the difficult conversation. But really, like Maggie said, we're not necessarily experts on it. I think both of us are kind of comfortable navigating difficult conversations. We both have different styles in how we do that. But really, we're comfortable there, and we read a little bit of Brene Brown. And so it's gotten us to this spot where we felt like we might have some nuggets that we could share that maybe you could share out at your campuses as well.
All right, so we will get into it. So as Carly has taught me, a good presentation needs to have learning outcomes. So the things that we are hoping that you will get out of this today, one is figuring out the why behind our fear of difficult conversations. So if you are someone who's afraid of having difficult conversations or being on the receiving end of difficult conversations, hopefully you'll have a little insight into why that is after this. We're going to help identify some strategies to overcome our fear and successfully navigate difficult conversations, and then develop an understanding of how difficult conversations can really strengthen a team when you have those conversations effectively. So we will move right along. So this is going to be one of those kind of reflection sharing times. So we really want you to think about the last time you had a difficult conflict with somebody. It could be a personal conflict. It could be a professional conflict. Just think about a time that you had conflict with someone. Did you discuss it with them? If yes, how did it go? And if no, why didn't that conversation happen? So if you want to throw something in the chat about that. Carly, I don't know if you want to monitor the.
Yeah, I'll look out for the chats, but I think if we could have a couple of people willing to share out maybe some of their experiences as well.
Nobody's just had conflict. That's okay too.
I can share. I didn't discuss it with the individual that I had conflict with because harmony is in my top 10 for Clifton strengths. And so I don't always necessarily like addressing conflict. And to me, it wasn't that big of a deal. So I felt like it was going to be better for our situation to let it go unspoken rather than addressing it.
Okay, thank you for sharing.
I'll go. Hi, my name is Rachel Frazier. I work at New Jersey Institute of Technology. There was a time when we were discussing some of the questions for RA interviews, and one of the questions were kind of like there were some things that were lost in translation of what we needed to send out and the questions that we wanted to have during RLD. So we had some of our our higher ups asked us a couple of questions on what they wanted from us. And it kind of seemed like we were confused about what exactly the questions we wanted to ask our RAs and how they fit in some of the developmental domains that we wanted to accomplish in those interview questions. So I sent an email with my group that was working on, well, my coworker that was also working on the questions, and we came together and said, hey, maybe we should just have a meeting all together instead of going back and forth via email, instead of getting edits of our questions. Let's come together, read the questions one by one, line by line, and make sure that we are reflecting on some of those questions correctly. I think sometimes with conflict, it could just be that things are lost in translation via email or via an assignment. So sometimes asking clarifying questions can be helpful.
Thank you.
And we have a couple of things in the chat. Heidi mentioned, I'm not comfortable with conflict, but I do better if I address it straight on. And then Lauren, this one speaks to my heart here. A recent conflict had me not addressing it with my coworker due to not wanting to deal with the expected/anticipated aftermath of addressing it.
That's a good point. Some other things that we've heard, because we've done this presentation with our staff here as well. Sometimes people avoid the conflict because there's a power differential. So their conflict is with someone who ranks above them. We've had people who have said they avoid the conflict because they don't think it's really going to make a difference. So if there's not going to be a change, why would you bother to use your energy and go through the discomfort of the conflict? You know, I can answer this both ways. I have had conflicts with people that I didn't discuss, sometimes because I was choosing success over being right. I've had conflicts with people that I have discussed that went better than expected because they were more receptive than I anticipated. I've also had, you know, conversations where it just was not received at all. And I will also share that wearing my HR hat, sometimes I sit in the room while people are having these conversations, sort of as a mediator. And sometimes I see one person think that they're doing a really good job addressing it head on, and I can see that the other person is just not getting it. And so that can sometimes be a barrier too. So thank you for the sharing. Anything else in the chat, Carly, that you want to,
Yeah, we just got one more that came through that I think is so good. I do well addressing conflict, but I like to process with a supervisor first to ensure I am going about it the right way. I will also tend to wait 24 hours before I address conflict to ensure emotions have settled. But if I don't address it within 48 hours, I choose to let it go, as it seems to be outdated at that point.
All right, we will talk about all of that.
Yeah.
So avoidance, why do we avoid? So, you know, a lot of times we avoid because we don't want to be mean. I hear this one a lot. I don't want to be mean. I don't want to hurt the other person's feelings. It feels like I'm having to be the heavy if I have to address the conflict. I've had people tell me it feels like I'm being really nitpicky if I have to address the conflict. So people sometimes will avoid it because they don't want to be mean. I love this one. This is a Carly line. It's uncomfortable, therefore it is the worst, right? None of us like to do things that are uncomfortable. I think most of us are going to avoid discomfort as much as we possibly can. Even though I think the logical side of our brains would tell us we know that's also how we grow. But just not wanting to be in that uncomfortable situation can make people avoid having the conversation. Sometimes we avoid it because we don't want to damage a relationship. We're not sure how the other person is going to respond. And so, you know, therefore we don't know them very well. And so we think, oh, if I bring this up, it's just going to make things worse. Spoiler alert, in my own experience, avoiding the conversation often makes it worse than having the conversation head on. And sometimes we just assume change isn't possible. I know Carly has experienced this. I don't know if you want to share anything about that.
Yeah, I'll kind of share. It relates a little bit back to what Lauren said in the chat about not wanting to deal with the expected or anticipated aftermath of addressing it. Sometimes that anticipated aftermath is the fact that they're not going to change. And so you go through the effort to have like this good quality conversation. And then if you're anticipating that nothing's going to change, then it makes you not want to do it at all, because who really wants to opt in to uncomfortable? It's uncomfortable, therefore it's the worst, right?
Yeah, particularly if it's not going to get you anywhere in the long run. So any other thoughts on avoidance? Anybody else want to chime in? Any last minute things in the chat about why you would avoid these conversations that we haven't talked about? There are lots of reasons. Obviously, we're just scratching the surface here. Okay. So think about a time the conversation did happen. Either you were the person confronting or you were on the receiving end of the confrontation. Sorry. What went well, and why do you think that went well? What went poorly, if anything, and why do you think that went poorly?
So I've had to have this conversation with the direct report. And I thought the conversation went well because I was able to provide examples. We were able to reflect on it. The employee responded and seemed to acknowledge that yes, those moments felt uncomfortable for them as well. Left the space feeling pretty comfortable, having confronted some of the concerns, set expectations around what would happen next, what not. Then ended up in a 1-hour one-on-one follow-up the next day, where they proceeded to argue with every point I had provided and said, here was why I was wrong. And it felt a little gaslighty on my end of like, maybe it's just me and maybe I overreacted. But in the moment, giving the feedback, they responded with, oh yeah, I know, I've gotten that feedback before and we talked about it. But then afterwards, it didn't feel like it went so well. When we had to rehash. This went on for probably about 3 months. The documentation became my friend, which then felt more awkward every time I would have to have some sort of accountability, difficult conversation. It's very circular.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Anybody have an example of when it went well?
There are a couple of comments in the chat. My heart was racing, my voice was shaking, but addressing the conflict directly brought positive change to an important work relationship. So that's a positive. And then Katie shared using I statements and examples were helpful. It was not accusatory and it allowed an example to resonate what was being shared. I can also share too while we're in a sharing space. I had a colleague one time who had mocked my belief system, like kind of on accident. She didn't know that that was my belief system. And, but then I had to have the circle back conversation of like, hey, listen, when this was shared, that was not great for me. Here's why. And then proceeded to, she just started like sobbing and then dismissed me from her office. And so that was a time that I was like, wow, I was really prepared for this conversation and like came at this from an understanding, with an understanding approach, and was not like super accusatory and aggressive about it. And you cried and dismissed me and very much so made it about you. And so that was a time that it didn't go so well.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
We have another one in the chat. Had a conversation with a friend / coworker. We seemed to come to an agreement, but nothing on their part changed. And if anything, it became worse. Eventually just had to dissolve the friendship. Ooh, that's hard.
Yeah, that is hard. That is hard. I was confronted once after how do I put this? How to express a moment of extreme frustration during a meeting in a way that I normally would not have done. With my director sitting behind me, by the way, that was super fun. But after that, I had one of my colleagues come in and just really express her disappointment and how I had behaved in that particular moment in that meeting. And, you know, I thanked her for coming to me. I could tell that it was something really difficult for her to do. She was the person with the voice shaking, and she was obviously very uncomfortable. And, you know, I just acknowledged that she was right. What I had said was really not professional. The way I'd behaved was really out of character for me. I didn't try to justify it or make excuses. I just kind of owned it. And, you know, we were able to move on from that. And I later apologized to other people who were in the meeting too. But that was a really humbling moment for me, for sure. To, you know, have to say, yeah, you're right. That was bad. That was bad on my part. So, so thank you for sharing that. So why is this important? Why is it important to be comfortable having these conversations? Well, I think first and foremost, you know, kind of in contrast to the reason we avoid being mean, one of my favorite lines out of Brene Brown, and I have read a lot of Brene Brown, is clarity is kindness. She uses that in a couple of her books, and she talks about this concept of when we are oftentimes when we are faced with these difficult conversations, we tend to kind of tap dance around the issue, or not face it head on, or sugarcoat it, or kind of try to couch it in niceties. And oftentimes that makes our message very unclear, and we leave that meeting not on the same page with the other person. And then we find ourselves back in the similar situation, you know, in another week, 2 weeks, a month down the road. When in reality, it is more important to be clear, and it is kinder to be clear, so the person that you're talking to really understands what it is you are trying to get across, right? We cannot expect, I tell my kids this all the time. I have two teenagers, excuse me. I cannot read your mind, right? I don't know what the issue is. I don't know what you're upset about if you don't articulate that to me. I can't help you with the problem. I can't fix the problem if you don't articulate it to me. And so this idea of honesty and clarity, being kind, I think is really, really important. And I know for me personally, really helps me kind of calm my nerves whenever I'm having to go into one of these difficult conversations, because I just remind myself I'm really doing a kindness to the other person, and being clear and concise and really specific with what it is that I have an issue with, right? I think the other thing, and again, any of you Brene Brown fans out there know she talks a lot about vulnerability. And I really, really think, particularly for those who are supervisors, that good leaders are vulnerable, right? One of the reasons that I think sometimes we avoid these conversations is because we don't want to have it turned around on us, right? As soon as I go to Carly as my employee and I say, hey, I have this issue that I think that you need to work on, I'm opening myself up to her saying, well, actually, I have an issue with you that you need to work on, right? And sometimes we don't want to hear that. Sometimes that's very challenging. But I really think that for those of us who are in leadership positions, which is probably everybody on this call, we have to be willing to be vulnerable and be open to that feedback and to put ourselves out there in that way. Because when we do that, and when we can role model how to do that appropriately, then it makes the people who work with us and for us more comfortable having those kinds of conversations with us, and more comfortable being vulnerable with us as well. Avoiding the conversation may breed despair, and that feels very dramatic to say. But sometimes, and I have experienced this myself, sometimes when we avoid the conversation because we think, oh, this person's not capable of change, or this person's not going to be willing to change, so what is the point? Then we kind of find ourselves in this spiral where we think we can let it go, but then realize that we can't. And it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And because we didn't address it quickly enough or directly enough, eventually we just get to the point where we absolutely cannot, maybe we can't work with the other person anymore, can't stand to be in the same room with the person anymore. And it can really kind of spiral into a much bigger thing than it needs to, had we just addressed it from the beginning and head on. And then, like I said, people can't fix what they don't know is broken. We are not doing anyone any favors by letting them continue to, not meet expectations, letting them continue to, using Carly's example, mock our belief systems. We're not doing them any favors if we don't try to help them better themselves, right? That's part of probably most of our jobs, is to help develop the people who work for us and with us. And so part of that is giving constructive feedback, and having difficult conversations about that. So Carly, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, so in a former life, I was an 8th grade science teacher, which in and of itself was its own adventure, right? But I remember one day I had a student who just had made some very poor choices in my class. And my assistant principal, his behavioral support for that was to offer this child a candy bar if he did not do this again. That is not what I was looking for. And so it just felt like there was no support, and how in the world could I possibly continue to teach here if this is how we handle these kind of egregious behaviors? And I remember thinking, y'all, and this was me at the youthful, had not had much practice in having these hard conversations. And so I was avoiding full force, right? Because in my mind, this is not getting any better. And I remember driving into work one day and thinking, okay, if I just got in just a tiny fender bender, just like a little one, nobody's hurt, right? It would delay me getting to work by at least a couple of hours, right? So that would be, and that's what I was hoping for that. That is terrible. That is so bad. And all of that really revolved around that one interaction, that one conversation that I wasn't willing to have. So why is this important? Sometimes it leads to career change, job change, things like that. And so I think we can't underestimate the power of having a good, difficult conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so some things to consider. So let's say that you know you need to have the difficult conversation and you think you're ready to do that. So here are some things that you can do to prepare. Okay. First of all, establish your Zen. Get yourself into a calming place. Give yourself a pep talk. Whatever it is that you need to do to become comfortable with having the conversation. So someone earlier referenced Strengths Quest and Strengths Finder. My number one strength is developer. So anytime I have to have a difficult conversation, in addition to thinking about clarity being kindness, I read the description for developer, because that is all about seeing someone's potential, trying to bring out the best in them, et cetera, et cetera. And I think, okay, this is the lens that I need to come at this through. I need to put my developer hat on and know that I'm doing this for the other person's best interests, right? So whatever you can do to establish your Zen, calm yourself down about it, will help you going into the conversation. The second thing, and these are in no particular order, but timing is everything. So somebody in, I think the chat said, after 48 hours, it feels too late to do it. I would say absolutely. You really need to make sure whenever you're getting ready to have this difficult conversation, that you do it in a timely manner. So what does that look like? It depends on the situation and the people involved, right? You've got to have time to be in the right frame of mind. The other person may need to have time to be in the right frame of mind. And that may be different for each one of you, but the longer you wait, the more likely you are to hear, well, if this was a big deal, why didn't you talk to me about it when it happened, right? How many of us have probably heard that? And the harder it is to remember details, the harder it is to remember examples. And, the longer it may draw out, and you continue to be worked up about it. So making sure that you are really timing the conversation appropriately is also helpful. I think this also depends on looking at what's on your calendar, looking at maybe what's on their calendar, maybe 5 o'clock on Friday is the best time. Maybe that's the worst time, right? Again, it just kind of depends on the situation and what's going on. But timing is really, really important. Sometimes it can be helpful to get a second opinion. You know, someone also referenced in the chat, or no, I think it was Katie who said, I kind of started to feel like I was being gaslighted. Like, is this really as big a deal as I made it out to be? So sometimes checking in with somebody to say, okay, here's a synopsis of the situation. You can do that confidentially and without involving the other person's name. Is this really a big deal? Am I blowing this up? Sometimes it's also helpful to get a second opinion if you don't know the other person very well, right? It could be helpful to talk to someone who does know them and say, hey, I need to have a difficult conversation with Carly. How do you think she's going to best receive that? Do I go in and be super direct? Do I need to make some small talk first? Kind of processing with somebody about the conversation can really help set you up for success as well. Someone also mentioned, you know, having specific examples. Absolutely. Preparing your talking points ahead of time can be very, very, very helpful, particularly if this is going to be like an accountability conversation with an employee. Because we all probably know somebody who's very good at steering the conversation in a different direction than where you want it to go. So by preparing your talking points, having specific examples that are focused on the person's behavior can really help you stay focused on those points and not make it feel as personal. And it also ensures that you get to say everything that you wanted to say during that conversation and that nothing is missed. It also will help you summarize at the end. And it will also help you summarize after the conversation if you choose to do that as well. And then I would also recommend that you brainstorm some solutions. If someone that I used to work for always used to say, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. So if you are going to go to someone and confront them about something that they're not doing correctly, that they're not doing well, expectations they're not meeting, it's a good idea to have some suggestions for how they can fix those behaviors. Doesn't mean that they have to follow your suggestions. And they may have their own suggestions that you talk about during that conversation. But again, it shows that you've put some real thought into trying to fix the problem and not just coming to the conversation to complain about whatever the issue is, right?
I'll add on just a couple of things. To the timing is everything piece. We know that timing is important, right? But I think about if somebody needed to confront me during training season, that's like a month of high stress time for me. And so that's just not a great time for, I may not be my most receptive self during that period of time, right? And so I think that ultimately, if we are putting something on a pause like that for a while, I think that's okay. I think you just change the framework of the conversation a little bit more and make it more of a reflective overall. How do you think we work together during this period of time? And so maybe not holding on to the most specific examples, but still going back and addressing some, like, I felt like there was tension at this point and at this point. How can we alleviate that in the future? Whatever that might look like. But I do think that timing, there are some times where that conversation doesn't need to happen within those 48 hours, right? So like caveats to all of this, right? And then on the get a second opinion piece, I use my friend Sarah as this example all the time. She is my friend that I go to, and I tell her that something is wrong or somebody has wronged me in any way. And she's like, let's go burn their house to the ground. Let's go slash some tires, right? Like she has taken up this torch on my behalf. And that feels great because then I feel validated in my concern and I feel like I've got somebody in my corner. And then she has to sit there and kind of like calm herself down and me down and help me come up with a more logical, solution-oriented approach to this conversation. So just word to the wise, find a balance in that second opinion. Choose the right person to go to kind of walk through what you're dealing with. Sometimes it is that person's colleague or friend because they have some insight into how you can best approach them. And sometimes it is your colleague or friend. So they can say, hey, you tend to fly off the handle when this particular issue is brought up. So avoid that. Or they'll help you kind of strategize a little bit more to be successful.
Okay, so let's talk about during the conversation. So I've said it, I'm going to beat this horse to death, you guys. Clarity is kindness, okay? Keep that in mind, because I have seen so many conversations where the confronter thinks they are being clear. I know exactly what it is their issue is and what they want to talk about. And I can just watch that unravel as they're talking, because they are not being clear and not saying what they mean. So say what you mean what you say. Okay. It can also be really helpful to express care for them. But as long as you're doing that in a sincere way, right? So one of the things that I try to do whenever I'm having to confront or hold someone accountable, is just tell them, I know that you can do better than this. I want our relationship to be a good one. I want you to be successful in this thing that you're taking on. So expressing care for them, sometimes your issue with them may also be because there are factors at play in their life that you're not aware of. So, I've had to have these difficult conversations that have started with, okay, your behavior is really out of character. So what's happening? Let's talk about what's going on. Is something happening that's causing you to be late, miss these deadlines, be snappy with your coworkers, et cetera, et cetera. If the person that you're confronting really and truly believes that you care for them and are coming to them from a place of care, then it's going to go a lot better. And I will own, sometimes that can be difficult. I'm not let's go burn their house down person typically, but I can get there really quickly depending on the situation. So sometimes it can be difficult. Sometimes you really have to kind of take a step back and remember, okay, this person is a human first and then an employee, or this person is a human first and then my colleague, and really kind of swallow some of your own frustration to approach it from that way. But it can really pay off big dividends when you are able to do that. It's also really important, and Brene Brown talks about this too, own your feedback. Okay. She basically says it is a chicken move to go in and say, we all think that your behavior is inappropriate, or we all have this problem with you. Well, who is the we? You and the mouse in your pocket, right? It is not appropriate for you to represent other people. So own your feedback, use your I statements, because unless you know for sure that other people feel that way, then you shouldn't represent them. And also, if you're going to be the one who takes the time to sit through the awkward, hard conversation, don't represent somebody else, just represent yourself in that. If other people have that issue, they can have their own awkward conversation about it, right? You should not have to fall on the sword for the entire group of people who feels that way. Focusing on behaviors, I kind of talked about that during the last slide. Making sure that you separate their behavior from them as a person can help really keep it business-like. It can also help really keep it not personal, because a lot of times people are kind of okay if you can identify a specific behavior, because then it feels like, if I were to say to Carly, whenever you're late, this is how it impacts our office, instead of me saying, you are a person with terrible time management and you need to get it together, right? Those are very different kind of tones. And then again, providing suggestions for improvement. They may not listen to your suggestions, and that is completely okay, but kind of offering that as a starting point can be very, very helpful. Carly, anything you want to add to this one? Okay. So let's talk about if you are the person being confronted, because sometimes this is also, sometimes this is easier than being the confronter, but sometimes it's harder, right? Because you don't have to build yourself up to the conversation. First and foremost, I think my number one piece of advice on this would be to have some grace. Have some grace for them. We have spent the last 20 minutes talking about how difficult it is to be the person initiating this conversation. And that is very easy to forget as soon as you are on the receiving end of it. So have some grace. Know that they are probably more uncomfortable than you are. Know that they have probably spent a lot of time agonizing over what they want to say to you, how they want to say it, when they want to say it, et cetera, et cetera. So have some grace and kind of recognize their care for you and having, put forth the effort to bring the conversation to you. This is a big one. Keep your defensiveness and your emotions in check. I bet all of us could take a pause right now and think of somebody in your life who, as soon as you have one small piece of constructive feedback, they are going to immediately get defensive. Their nonverbals are going to change. How does that make you feel about talking to them? I know for me, when I think about the person who comes to mind for me, it makes me just not want to, right? Because it's not going to be pleasant. Even if they seem receptive or they say they're receptive, if their tone, their body language, their facial expressions show that they're not, it does not make me inclined to talk to them, right? So keep in mind how that makes you feel as the confronter and try not to do that with other people. Now, if you genuinely get emotional, because I've got criers on my staff, right? I have one staff member who, if she's happy, she cries. If she's sad, she cries. If she's stressed, she cries, right? That is not me. I'm not a crier. So it's taken me some time to get used to that. But there are people who are going to get emotional. And if you are one of those people who gets emotional, that's okay. Just say to the person, I'm getting emotional, but that's okay. Let's keep having the conversation. This is just my eyeballs are going to leak while we're having it. It doesn't mean that you can't continue. It just means that I'm going to have to sit here and cry. Right. So if that's you, that is okay. But if you can keep your emotions in check, try to keep your emotions in check. Ask questions for clarity. If you don't feel like they are being clear, we've all been in conversations where you can tell the person wants to say more than they're saying, right? So if you feel like there's something that they are not saying, there's something that they're not leaving out, there's something that they're trying to kind of gently step around, just ask them, I don't understand what you're saying. Can you be more direct? Can you be a little bit clearer? And really and truly listen. Try to listen for understanding. We all know that in a lot of conversations, particularly difficult conversations, as soon as the other person starts talking to us, we start mentally formulating our defense, mentally formulating our response. And that means that you're not truly hearing what the other person has to say. So take time to ask questions for clarity if you need it, and really, really, truly listen. If you're someone who needs time to process, just ask for that. You may not be able to respond in that moment, and that is completely okay. So you may need to say, you know what, I've heard everything that you have to say, and I really need some time to think about it before I can continue to engage in the conversation. Can we meet again tomorrow? Can we meet again in 2 days? Ask for time to process, but make sure that you are honoring that and following up on the conversation. Okay. Don't use that as your out of the situation, or a way to kind of avoid having that conversation. And then if you can find something you can fix, offer that up. Sometimes that's as easy as owning your mistakes. Sometimes it can be, having a specific, okay, let's agree on what the expectation is. But try to find something that you can do to meet them halfway, I guess is what I'm trying to say there. Carly, do you have anything else on that?
I was just kind of thinking, or the visualization popped in my head where it's like, you're really kind of trying to like drive from the passenger seat a little bit, because I think when people do get really nervous and we're having grace for them, right? We still need to help them get to where they're trying to go. And so sometimes that looks like the mama leaning over when she's teaching her kid to drive and like helping with the steering a little bit, right? But encouraging that clarity and asking those questions, I think, is huge. And sometimes this unifying statement, Drew sent this in the chat, but ultimately we usually want the same result, which is the best experience for our students. And I like that as like a unifying, hey, we're on the same like track here. This is our end goal. So how can I help us to get there. Like, what is it that you need to tell me? Or like, what do I need to change or adjust or adapt? So that ultimately we can contribute to our students. And so again, you're making it about someone other than you and them, right? You're making it about our students. And so I thought that was a good comment and a good thing to bring into the conversation.
Couple of other things that I've thought of. One, when we talked about consulting with somebody else before you have the conversation, I think the other thing to think about is there are some people who you can walk into their office without any warning and have this conversation and it'd be completely fine. There are other people that you may need to say to them, I need to talk to you about XYZ, and I'm going to put on a meeting on your calendar to talk about that. And they need that time and they need that kind of heads up before engaging in the conversation. And that can really sometimes make or break your success in having that conversation with them. So I think it's really important to sort of know the other person in that way. Do they need, we have a colleague here who, if I were just to say to her, hey, can we talk? I need to have a conversation. She is immediately going to go to the worst case scenario and think that I am mad at her, hate her. She's done everything wrong, even if it's just I have a quick question to ask you. So we know, a lot of us know, you have to give her context. Hey, I need to have a conversation with you about this thing that we're planning together. Do you have time tomorrow? Something like that. So just kind of knowing your audience and doing some of that prep work can really help you be more successful as well. Okay, so following up, because the conversation is not where it stops. Okay, so there's some things that you would need to do. So you might need to schedule a follow-up conversation, particularly if the other person reacts poorly, if they get emotional, if they, make it clear that they cannot continue to engage in the conversation. Schedule a follow-up, okay, and then hold them to that follow-up. Sometimes, and I'm just going to say this, there are some people who are going to use that emotional response as a way to avoid the conversation. So you really have to kind of balance being understanding of their need to have time to process with having the conversation, right? It reminds me, I've got a teenage daughter. Sometimes she gets hormonal and cries for no reason. And I have literally said to her, I understand that you're crying, but I need you to come in the kitchen and help me do chores. So if you need to cry while you're doing that, cry while you're doing it, but we still have to get through what needs to be gotten through, right? We still have to do the thing. So scheduling that follow-up and making sure that you actually have it. Even if the conversation goes well, it can be really helpful to have a follow-up conversation about it. Just to check in, like, okay, we had this talk a week ago. I feel like things have gotten better. I think that I feel like, we're in a good place. How do you feel about it? Because I think it was like Katie said, her good conversation ended up turning into months and months of follow-up. So again, just kind of making sure that you're on the same page and that you're staying on the same page, and that you're able to sort of course correct if you start to things start to get askew or go sideways, can be helpful. If you notice positive behavior changes, if the person has really obviously taken to heart what you had to discuss with them, compliment that, comment on that, make sure that they understand or that they know that you have noticed that positive change. That can be really, really encouraging to them. If the conversation resulted in some expectations being set, have regular check-ins to make sure that you're on that same page. One of the things that Brene Brown talks about is kind of being clear and defining what the end product looks like. So even if you've set those expectations, making sure that whatever the end product needs to look like is clear to everybody can be really helpful. An example that I have, one of my employees told her grad student, I need you to set up this space for this event. And she walked in 15 minutes before the event and the space was not set up to her expectations. And she was frustrated. And I asked her, I said, well, did you tell him what your expectations were? And she said, well, yes, I told him I needed the chairs out and the tables out and the food laid out. And I said, okay, but did you tell him how you wanted the chairs arranged, how you wanted the tables arranged, where you wanted the food, etc. And she realized that even though she thought she had communicated some expectations, she had not given him a clear picture of what the finished setup needed to look like. So she had to kind of take some ownership in her side of that misunderstanding and that not going the way that she thought it should. So checking in to make sure expectations are being met can be important. And it's really also very important to find other things to connect about, right? That difficult conversation should not be your only conversation with that person. And once you've decided that you're both past it, you need to stay past it, right? Now, obviously, if the behavior repeats itself again or something else happens, then that's something you would have to address. But if you make the decision not to have the conversation because you're just going to get over it, then you need to truly get over it. And if you're going to have the conversation and it doesn't go well, you may have to figure out a way to continue to work with that person. But if you can find other things to connect about, it can help you move past that, and can really help kind of strengthen that working relationship, friendship, whatever kind of relationship it is with the other person. Carly, any thoughts on this? Or anybody else for that matter?
No, I think it ties back to why it's important, right? So we mentioned that it has having these difficult conversations has the ability to strengthen your team. I think it only strengthens your team if all of these things are done well. And if that follow-up happens, and if you're checking in, and if you're finding other things to connect about, because if you miss on any of those, then that difficult conversation can become a wasted effort. Because we know it's effort on both sides, as the giver and the receiver of the conversation. And so I think if we miss there, or if we miss on follow-up, then we miss the opportunity to grow and strengthen our teams.
Yeah. I think also to this last point, not to use, another cliche, but sometimes you might just have to agree to disagree with the other person. You may not see eye to eye on an issue. I have a colleague here who, due to our roles and what we do for the department, I won't say we bump heads often, but we occasionally bump heads. And when we do bump heads, it's usually fairly significant. And there are times when we're just on opposite sides of an issue, and we have to be comfortable being on those opposite sides. Luckily we're friendly enough with each other that if the decision is made in one of our, favors or another, then we can kind of joke that we won that argument. But sometimes you just have to agree to disagree. And that's when it becomes really, really important to find other things to connect about. I think this is particularly the case when, you're talking about belief systems, when you're talking about, how you feel about certain, issues on your campus. I think this comes into play if, you and a colleague are advocating for different things for your team and the decision doesn't come down on your side. You still have to, at the end of the day, be able to work with this person or get along with this person. Or you have to decide that you're going to end the friendship, or you have to decide that you're going to move on. And if that's the case, then that's the case. But if you're still going to engage with them, you have to find a way to do that productively. And so sometimes that really does take just kind of saying, okay, we're on opposite sides of this issue, and we just have to be comfortable with that, and still figure out a way to work together. So this quote, I love this quote. We have to be able to take feedback, regardless of how it's delivered, and apply it productively. We have to do this for a simple reason. Mastery requires feedback. I don't care what we're trying to master and whether we're trying to develop greatness or proficiency, it all requires feedback. We cannot get better at what we do without people giving us feedback. And we cannot expect the people who work for us and with us to be better at what they do without giving them feedback. So at the end of the day, we really have to stay focused on that. We are all just trying to be the best that we can be in whatever it is that we are doing. to serve our students, to serve our departments, et cetera. And all of that requires feedback. And the more comfortable you are giving it, the more comfortable you are receiving it, the easier that's going to make it for you and for the people you work with. So hopefully this has been helpful. Any questions, any last thoughts? I think we've still got about 5 minutes left. You can put it in the chat. You can speak up.
We do have one comment in the chat that we didn't get to address earlier, but it says from Josie, when it comes to the difficult behavior of an employee that is your direct report and you've received concerns from multiple other direct reports who aren't comfortable addressing the person directly, it's hard to know what to do. I think my response to this would be a couple of things. I don't know if you're really asking, but here it is. I think one, hopefully that's behavior that you've observed as well, so you can address it based on your experience. But I also think these difficult conversations, it's such a coachable moment for you with your other direct reports to guide them on how to have that conversation well. Because I do think this feedback coming from your supervisor is heard one way, but when you hear it from a peer that you're affecting negatively by your behavior, I think it rings a little bit different. So encouraging your other direct reports to see the value in that conversation and then kind of coaching them through to how to have that conversation could be helpful, and being that support person for them to check in with before and after should they choose to have that conversation, I think is a great role for you to play there.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I will also share, I've said to a couple of my direct reports, if this is this big of an issue for you, then you've got to talk to them about it. Otherwise, you've got to get over it, right? If it's something that you truly feel this strongly about, then you need to have that conversation. And coaching them through that conversation, giving them some pointers, even being there for the conversation if they feel like they're going to need some kind of mediator or moderator, can be a great way to do that, a great way to coach them through that.
Another question just came in on the chat. Do you approach addressing conflict with an employee differently based on age? Example, a younger supervisor and an older supervisee. If so, how?
I would say at face value, no. It's going to depend on the situation. I think when you're addressing employees, hopefully what you're addressing is based on some kind of specific behavior, failure to meet expectations, et cetera. And so I would approach that the same. I've supervised people who were old enough to be my mom, and I've supervised people who sadly I could be their mom at this point. And I think my general approach to that is always the same. It's focused on the behavior. It includes some clear expectations. I think an acknowledgement of what they contribute to the team is also very helpful as well. But I think if you're in a place where you're supervising someone, it's because you have experience to supervise them, whether they're older, younger, whatever. And so I think my general approach would be the same.
I would also say here too, just because they could be 60 years old, but maybe developmentally, maturity wise, whatever that looks like, they could be acting like a 30-year-old, who knows? So I think gearing that response towards the individual and what they need specifically as just a human, regardless of their age, might be more successful than I think it's easy to let age intimidate us. If somebody's older than us, then we feel like, oh, how can we possibly engage in that difficult conversation with them or call them out on something. But I do think if you gear it towards the individual and take in all of the factors and you're addressing behavior, then I would tailor my approach that way versus focusing on age.
Great questions.
Yeah, thank y'all for asking such good questions and being engaged and sharing your stories and participating. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to share a final thank you to Maggie and Carly for presenting today, and to all of you for attending and participating verbally and in the chat. I will share again our schedule of programs that are coming up for the Best of series. I think that we have one of our other presenters on the call. I don't know, I won't call him by name, but if you want to speak up, if you're one of our other presenters, if you want to plug your session, you're welcome to in this last moment that we have. But again, that whole list of programs is linked on that website and folks can register there.
And there might be more of us, but I'm one of them. I'm Corey Peacock, Dean of Students at Casper College, and I'm presenting next Thursday, I believe. Like many of you on the call, I live my life on my calendar day by day, so we're a few days away, but my session is called Supervising Like a Boss. So we'd love to see you all there.
Thanks for that promo, Corey. And again, thanks to Maggie and Carly today. It's been lovely.
Thanks, y'all.